Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, at the end of every episode, I always ask all of you out there listening to this podcast, scattered all around the world, to slide into my DMs or send me a quick email if you have any questions or you want to share your story. And today's guest did just that. His name is Patrick Ward from Rootstrap, and he messaged me on LinkedIn and asked if he could come on and share his story and a few things that he's quite passionate about at the moment. And of course I obliged. So today I want to learn more about Rootstrap, how they're using technology to help enterprises scale people, processes and products, all through outcome-driven development. But I also want to take a deep dive into the world of machine learning, artificial intelligence, NFTs, and maybe dispel a few myths along the way. How does that sound? Good answer. Well, buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Los Angeles, where Patrick Ward is waiting to join us today. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about how you got here and share your origin story with everyone listening?
Thanks, Neil. So my name's Patrick Ward, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Rootstrap. But as my accent belies, I was originally born and raised in Australia before I came over to the United States. We were actually just talking a little before off air about that. It's a really interesting case. Started as many marketers do in the advertising world, had bounced around a number of different industries, and have finally found my home in tech. So right now I run marketing for a custom software development agency called Rootstrap, and I always say that means nothing to no one. So the thing that I like to tell people is we are the tech team behind Masterclass. So if anyone during the pandemic learned a Gordon Ramsay recipe, that was using our technology.
Wow, that's incredibly cool. So for anyone hearing about Rootstrap for the very first time, can you tell me a little bit more about that, what it is, how you help enterprises scale people, processes and products to outcome-driven development? Because, again, it's like you guys are the unsung hero, aren't you? Because everyone's probably used your technology without even realising it.
Very much so. We are very much a behind-the-scenes type of person. Really, companies tap us for technical expertise, and other things they tap us for is what's known as development muscle. So they've got a product they need to bring to market. They're wondering what's the best tech stack to use, how to build it in the most strategic way possible to help them meet their business goals, and then obviously the actual physical act of building the product. And so, many of the pieces of technology that we've built over the years, many consumers will be aware of the consumer-facing brands like Masterclass, but what they often don't realize is there's always, many technical teams behind that, and that's where we come in. Other clients that we've worked with in the past, a good example I like to use is Tony Robbins. So Tony came to us a number of years ago when he was still basically putting out his content via CDs at his seminars. And he came to us and said, hey, I've got these CDs, I've got all this good content. Shouldn't it be in an app form? And sure enough, that's what we did. I still really get chills to this day because as part of that deal, we got a little promotional clip of him giving us a 45-second testimonial, and you just hear that quintessential baritone voice of his, and it's the best form of marketing you can ever get.
It really is. God, I grew up on a lot of that Tony Robbins stuff, and like I say, it's so distinctive, and that's just worth its weight in gold on its own. And just to further bring to life what we're talking about here, I'd love to dive into some real-world examples. And I'm going to be the stereotypical Brit here, because before you came on the podcast, I was doing a little bit of research on you guys, and one of the things that stood out was an NFT collection for Liverpool Football Club. So is there anything you can share about that, just to bring everything to life as well?
Totally. So this pains me as a Manchester United fan, but we're doing a project based around NFTs, exactly as you say, for Liverpool Football Club. And I was looking at this space, honestly, still perplexed. Even to this day, NFTs still, I wonder, is it digital artwork? Is it a record of ownership? Like, what's the deal here?
Yeah.
But sure enough, what we did as a project was called Liverpool Heroes, and it was part of their charitable foundation. So when you purchased the NFTs, and there was a collection of various great players of Liverpool throughout the years, you not only obviously got that piece of memorabilia, but more importantly, a portion of your purchase went to the Liverpool Charitable Foundation. And so what that opened my eyes up to, because again, I've still been a little skeptical about this industry, is starting to see some of these real use cases. So in that case, you're looking at, this titan of a brand in Liverpool, and they're finding a new way through a new form of technology to engage their fan base. Like many football clubs, they already have a rabid fan base. And so NFTs just provide an additional alternate route to keep those fans engaged, keep them connected to the club, and obviously doing it for a good cause through their charitable arm.
Incredibly cool what you're doing there. And also, when researching you, I read a great quote from you about how machine learning and NFTs are two areas that receive too much hype and are often spoken about by charlatan futurists, which immediately caught my attention. And I think for many people, those words alone will resonate with them. And I know you're very passionate about the industry, but I'd love to find out a little bit more about your frustrations around some of that hype too.
Yeah, the frustrations are really born out of this idea that, technology does have immense capacity, but for as long as it has existed, it has been surrounded by certain types of snake oil salesmen. And they're the same people who did, the usual fake guru shtick all through the early 2000s and, into the 2010s and now into the 2020s. I don't think we'll ever get rid of them. They're the same types of people that, first were big into affiliate marketing, and then they got really big into coaching, and then they got into like spiritual wellness, and now they're into, technology until they move on to the next thing. At last glance, I saw it was real estate in Costa Rica seemed to be the latest thing that a lot of these charlatans were into. But what I find disappointing about these people is they overhype the power of the technology, usually far in advance of where the technology is, and they scare consumers. And what I've learned as myself being a non-technical person in this field, I don't know most technology from Adam, but what I've learned being in the weeds of it is that really it's not as advanced as you think it is yet. It takes a lot of trial and error and a lot of incremental experimentation to get to, a viable business use. But when you do understand the power of the technology and what it can do, then you can start thinking of proper use cases that help the consumer in their everyday lives. So similarly with when we look at both of these places, AI and NFTs. So I'll start with NFTs. NFTs, if you really think about it, are still in its infancy. And I think the power that people need to start thinking about it is in terms of smart contracts, like a really boring area. You think about when you buy a house, or if you buy a product and you're wondering whether it's real or fake, and you want that level of authenticity, or you want your item tracked all the way from the supplier to once it's delivered to your house. These sorts of very boring, fundamental, everyday areas that create a lot of pain, a lot of havoc for a lot of consumers, that's really where NFTs can provide a level of authenticity and a level of security that is very valuable. Similarly, when we move over to AI, everyone always has the same worry. AI is going to take my job. AI is not going to take your job. It's going to take the parts of your job that honestly you don't like doing anyway. I know this, especially in a sales and marketing function. So much of our job is manual data entry, and it's painful. It needs to be done so that we have data to use, but it is painful to do. And that's really what we need to start conceptualizing when we think of AI. I always like to use this example to get people to not be as scared about it as the Terminator robot scenario that often gets painted. When I was at a previous company a couple of years ago, we had these robots that we mapped out the whole of the office, and they were essentially autonomous, completely powered by AI. They would get to the edge of a carpet and they would stop because they thought it was the edge of a cliff and they were going to die. Or they would go underneath a set of stairs and they get trapped because they couldn't figure out how to get themselves out. So AI is really good at pattern recognition. It's really good at crunching the numbers, but it is nowhere near the level of creative intelligence, those sorts of areas that only a human can do. And that's why I always encourage people to think is like, think of the areas that you don't like in your job and how AI can help you do those better so you can spend more of your time doing the stuff that is really exciting in your job.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think for too long we've been talking about AI and technology competing for jobs rather than complementing and helping us. And it's such a good point you made there. And I think we can both agree that AI isn't going to take your job, and NFTs aren't just a get-rich-quick fad. They are going to be around for a long time. But can you expand on that? And are there any other myths that we can dispel today that might frustrate you? Because there's a lot of them out there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think the other aspect that still actually gets used in a lot of marketing for AI products is that it's acting like it's going to do everything for you. And that's not going to be the case. So a classic example that I always go back to is this idea of copy. So I started my career as an SEO copywriter. So any sort of assistance I can get is great. You look at these tools, a couple of them are like Jasper AI or Copy.ai, and they're essentially, they use a large body of text to surface suggested copy. Now, you might look at that and think, great, I never have to write my own blog post again. I never have to write ad copy again. That's not true in the slightest. What my experience has been using these products, and they produce a decent starting point, but it does not fully tell your brand story. It doesn't fully get your message across, and it can't. All it is identifying patterns and producing an outcome. Now, I will say it's rapidly sped up my time. I would take, 4, sometimes 8 hours to produce an article. When I use one of these tools, suddenly I can cut that down to 15 to 20 minutes. And that's really because I think it's getting you over that hurdle of when you stare at a blank screen. And we know this as a phenomenon of many writers, is like the hardest part is just that initial staring at a blank screen. Once you've got some words on the page, it's so much easier. And so that's what I think everyone needs to grasp with, is that the point of AI is to augment what you're already doing so that you can spend more time on the true parts that really it can't do, like true creativity, true innovation, true where a human is able to look at the world and see something in an entirely new way. That only comes from our brains. And I think that's something that we still devalue to this day. We don't recognize like our brains are stronger than the most powerful computers out there. And they still will be for some time to come. Now, when it comes to the area of NFTs, again, I understand that, it's very tempting to write it off as a fad. But I would tell you that the underlying message of it is blockchain. Because I think that this is where we often like to ignore trends from history. You know, when you look at the dot-com bubble that happened in the early 2000s, that didn't kill the internet. The internet just changed. And similarly, yes, are there some fads? Are there some, that we're seeing crypto pump and dump schemes in the recent year have definitely surfaced. Those will happen. There are always going to be scam artists, unfortunately, with any new industry or any new technology. That always happens because people are exploiting information arbitrage. What I think is key is, again, just always being willing to ask those questions. Because the great thing about the charlatans is they don't often have an answer once you ask them one or two questions. So really, you want to dig into someone who can be a little skeptical. I always love leaning on tech people to explain technology, because as much as they might give you a very nerdy response, they'll always give you an honest response. So we're still very early in the stage of what NFTs can even do for us. I still hone in on this theme, and I know I've said it before, but I'm honing in on this theme of thinking about boring industries. Because when I get really excited about blockchain, I think about the decentralization of it, the authenticity and verification that it can provide. There is a whole network of suppliers, and we've seen a little bit of this when it came to pandemic supply chain shortages. But I think a lot of people don't realize there is a huge network of supply chain behind every business, and there is a huge amount of value in being able to track products all the way through that. That, I think, is the real power of where blockchain is headed, rather than an image of an ape on online.
100% with you. And I'm curious, as a writer guy myself, the tools that you've used in the past that do help you just get an idea or extra words on the page early to get you started. I've tried a couple of them, had mixed results. Which did you prefer out of the ones that you've tried?
Personally, I've lent towards copy.ai. I think Jasper was probably the earliest to market. I think Copy perfected it a little bit better. I think Jasper was tending towards an ad copy style conversion type writer. And that makes sense because honestly, like, ad copy is still the majority of permutations that most writers do. The reason I personally like copy is I've always been an organic content-driven guy, obviously starting in SEO. So anything that helps me write like a fully fleshed out article as opposed to like a CTA or a tagline is always going to be more beneficial to me.
Excellent. Well, I'll check that out. And as we move forward, what excites you about this space at the moment, especially where Web3 is going to take us, because that seems to be where all the attention is at the moment. There's a lot of hype around that too. But what is it that excites you about what the next 5 years or so is going to bring them?
Yeah, so Web3 is a really interesting space, and this is where I'm a little bit of a contrarian. I'm excited about the potential of decentralization. I'm excited because let's look at like Web2. Social media made the promise that, you're going to be super connected to a lot of people. You're going to have an ability to not only connect with other humans, brands, all the different entities that you want to connect to on a daily basis. And that promise essentially got consolidated down to a handful of social media networks. And so, but it was funny to me because they positioned themselves so much against mainstream media and the major news networks, and yet they basically became, a handful of them themselves. And I think this still comes back to what have consumers been yearning since the start. I feel they often just made a deal with the devil when it came to, well, maybe I don't want to give up all this control to a company like Facebook, but I'll do it because everyone else I know is there. What Web3 allows is people to still maintain ownership over those, whether it's digital assets, whether it's content they put out, whether it's their own profiles, and migrate that through their experience of the web. Having said that, the thing that still terrifies me about Web3 is corporations, because already I'm in these marketing circles where companies are thinking, how can we create exclusive experiences? And they use all the right words. They're like, oh, we just want to create experiences for our most valued customers. And my red flags go, right off when I hear that, because what it once again sounds like is siloing people, making them feel divided from one another. What I really hope we get right with Web3, if we truly do decentralization right, is we actually do create a more connected world. Because let's be honest, that has always been the promise of the internet. The promise of the internet was always that it was going to unite, humans regardless of race, culture, gender, country of origin, nationality, all these different areas, and create a more unified global communal spirit. Well, as anyone will tell you who's been on any of the social media networks, that promise has not been lived up to. So I'm hoping that this time with Web3, we have a chance to get it right. But that's going to require people to drive the creation of it, not corporations.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about social media there, it reminded me of two movie quotes. One, Harvey Dent in Batman, you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And the other one in Star Wars, you were the chosen one. It was said you would destroy the Sith, not join them. It's so true, isn't it, when you look at it?
I love that. Yeah, those two speak very well to my heart. I feel like the brands were too quick to interject themselves into social media, particularly where they didn't genuinely do it in a way that mattered to consumers. Some of them did it right, but many of them did it wrong. I just hope they don't cannibalize and do the same poor thing that they did with social media as they'll do with Web3. I think that hopefully if they look at it rigorously, if they look at it intelligently, if they analyze the data properly this time, they'll realize where they can make, appropriate interjections into the space without, interfering with what consumers really want.
Yeah, because I think over the last few years, there's been a lot of excitement about blockchain and crypto and building a decentralized future where it's completely the opposite to what we've experienced in the past. But we are starting to see banks and governments, etc., trying to make it more centralized. So it is a bit of a worrying prospect for the future, but hopefully we'll find a happy medium. But back on to you for a moment. I mean, you made the Financial Times America's fastest growing companies list. Can you tell me more about that and what it means to you? What it means to you guys? Yeah,
it was pretty incredible to make it on not only those lists, also the Inc. 5000 list, and to have done it for a number of years. What I think was particularly special, for myself, was that when I joined Rootstrap, we were sub 100 employees. We were, a decent sized when I joined. We're probably around, 6 to 7 million. But to see us break through a $10 million barrier, that was huge. That's something that Gartner, as much as, I don't find analyst firms to be worth their weight in salt, but at least Gartner's analysis has said that 10 million is usually the threshold that a lot of tech companies perish if they don't get through it. So that was a highlight, but it was more a credit not only to myself, but really to my entire team. Because when I first came on board with Rootstrap, it was a classic founder-led sales motion. It was basically through connections and networking, but they really lived on this feast and famine idea for a number of years at that point, and they really didn't have any predictable way of growing. And so they hired me, being humble enough to acknowledge we don't know what we don't know. Patrick, you're good in this space and you know how to market to, these high ticket offers. can you, sort it out for us? So as we started climbing and growing, and then, like you say, getting those sorts of recognitions from Financial Times, that was just a really nice external validation that, hey, we're on the right track, we're doing the right things, and we're getting, the right recognition for it.
And you guys have launched more than 750 plus digital products with more than 100 million combined downloads. But where do you go from here? What's next for you guys?
So I think the really interesting space that I personally am most excited about is agriculture. I think that when I look at the world, and what excites me but terrifies me is particularly the effect of climate change. And obviously, I'm not saying that, storms and freak weather events are not, bad. They obviously are. But the more sustained challenges I look at is in terms of feeding the world. And that's where I think agriculture has to step up, and they can, especially with the right technology. We've got a proof of concept that we're doing right now around cattle counting, which, funnily enough, uses AI to analyze all the different cows in a field, and it can detect any abnormalities that any of those cows might have. You can trace certain diseases based on these abnormalities. You can detect, health of the herd. That type of work, I think we're going to do a lot more of in the future. And that is what I think really excites me, because it brings together this nice synthesis of, we are still using technology and we're still being, tech first. That was our founding principle, based on the Andreessen Horowitz idea that software was going to eat the world. But what is most exciting is that it's actually contributing to a part of the world that is very beneficial for all humans. I think that when I speak with people who are outside the tech space, who are often, disillusioned with it, it's not because the tech was bad. Tech is not good or evil. Tech is merely the tool. It is how humans choose to use it. And so what I'm excited is that what we can do at Rootstrap is really pave a way forward, that there is a way that you can do it in an ethical, kind way for the planet that uses technology for good, as opposed to exploiting human tendencies like the social media networks have done over the years.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today. But before I let you go, I always like to have a bit of fun with my guests. And you've shared your origin story with me. I'm now going to ask you to share something that has inspired you, a book maybe that has inspired you, that we can then add to our Amazon wish list and pass on to everyone listening. Is there a book that you have in mind that we can add to that list?
Yeah. So again, I am a super contrarian. I know that a lot of marketers always like to recommend like a business book or a marketing book or anything like that. I actually seldom read those types of books, because I think that marketing at the end of the day is about understanding humans and understanding humans from all walks of life. So I want to give the contrarian idea of Spanion, An Unfiltered Hood Life. This is about a former criminal, and it's a really interesting view into what happens to someone who grows up in the wrong situation on the wrong side of the tracks. And as a former working class boy myself, I just found it a very relatable read. And I think what's really interesting through the storytelling of this book is that you realize that humans, despite all the divisions, all the boundaries, all the different categories that we put each other in, we're all very similar, much more similar than I think we acknowledge on a daily basis. And so I would encourage all of your listeners to check out this book. It is a strange one. It is probably one that they've not encountered on a regular basis, but I think it is imperative on each of us as to be true, genuine, kind humans, and that starts from understanding. So Spanion and Unfiltered Hood Life.
Awesome. Well, that's one I'll make a promise to you that I'll be checking out. I often think with those business books like you mentioned there, I think if everyone read those same books, everyone just thinks the same. So it's one of the reasons that I avoid them as well. But for everyone listening that would just like to find out more information about Rootstrap, all the topics we covered today, or even contact you or your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
So if you want to contact our team, you can go to www.rootstrap.com. That's ROOTSTRAP. Or you can connect with myself directly on LinkedIn. That's linkedin.com/in/Patrick James Ward.
Well, so much I loved about our conversation today, talking about Web3, NFTs, AI, busting myths. But I think also your very personal story of starting out as a working class boy in Australia, and then here you are in Los Angeles with Rootstrap and one of Financial Times America's fastest growing companies. Inspirational story. I hope it will inspire other people listening all over the world. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
Really appreciate it, Neil.
What a great guy. And that is how this podcast works. You send me a DM or an email, we hop on a call for a friendly chat, and then share it with you all. And for me, podcasting can and should be as simple as that. One of the most common emails I get from you all is, Neil, how do you keep up doing a podcast every single day? Well, I'm currently recording 10 a week. I think I've got 10 a week booked in till the end of June. And for me, I always try and keep things simple. I don't want to overcomplicate things. We hop on a call, we'll have a chat and beam it around the world. So if that sounds good to you, send me a quick DM now or send me an email. So it's techblogwriter@outlook.com, @Neil C. Hughes on Twitter, LinkedIn and Instagram. And I also say on every podcast that if I'm out and about going to tech showroom floors and everything, and I'm going to do that one event at a time. So if anybody out there is going to Cisco Live in Vegas in June, give me a shout. We can meet in person. But that's it for today. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.